All together again. So to begin this party, we're going to light the chalice this morning, okay? All right. Please join with me. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we live together.
And as the candle is lit and as the chalice is lit, may we continue to calm our hearts and spirits as we continue to draw ourselves together here. Thank you for your attention as John plays. Drops of rain that find each other and build into a track, a rivulet, a stream, a river, a sea, so we are drawn together. So we are fortunate to find each other. So we are bound together on this shared passage toward an unknown ocean and eternity. Welcome here to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Low Country. My name is Charlie Tyler. I'm the pastoral minister here. It's my pleasure to serve this church. And to have you here today, I pray that this would be a meaningful time together, that you might be able to learn things of each other, about yourself, and about what we might be able to do in our world around us. So there's a number of announcements that need to be made. Kathy Zeiser, Kathy, if you would please.
Good morning, everyone. I put some flyers out on the table out there. Lufton Self-Help needs fall tutors at their Hilton Head Island location. The commitment is 1 or 2 per week. It runs from August to December. The location is on Hilton Head Island. No prior teaching experience is required. No foreign language fluency is required. Training, curriculum, and support is provided. So if you have a real yearn to, yes.
You said English as a second language?
It would be English as a second language, yes. So brochures are out there, or flyers are out there, so pick one up if you're interested. It is the Hilton Head Island location. So I'll make that clear. Thank you.
Kathy, and I'm looking for someone to educate me in English, second language too. You saw a brief clip this morning as we were gathering in Kristen Maxwell and her style, her song, and talent that she has. She will be in concert here Saturday, August 16th at 7 p.m. and I do hope that you're able to make it. That will be a really special time for us to gather, get some refreshment as we move into our summer and fall. Are there any other announcements that I need to draw our attention to? Something that I've forgotten? It's my pleasure today to welcome back into this pulpit my first cousin, Ray Tyler, and to be able to bring some of his insights, some of his knowledge as a historian and as a teacher of history, and as a person who continues to be plumbing the depth of history in this part of the country. As a matter of fact, he talked about later on this afternoon of going and rummaging around Port Royal to try and find some significant places that he might fulfill even more of his understanding of our world. And so, Ray, it's my pleasure to welcome you back to this pulpit. And in a few moments, you'll be having gifts, if you would please, for your opening words. Thank you, Ray.
And to unmute myself. Well, I sound loud to myself. I'm okay with you guys? Yeah, I was going to use Corinthians 13:11 as opening words. And I don't know if I didn't turn to it real quickly. I'm going to try to do it from memory. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I acted as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put aside those childish things.
Thanks, Ray. Now, if you would please take your hymnals into your hands, turn with me, if you will, to hymn number 101. May we stand together if you're willing and able, and sing Abide with Me. Thank you. You may be seated. I have neglected, Wendy. Thank you for your start today. You're a cheerleader. And we're just ready to follow. Thank you for that. Your heart is special. But I have neglected to ask for opportunities to introduce our first and second time visitors here today. And so if you are one of those and you feel like you might be able to give us your name and tell us where you're from, there's a real good chance that somebody else in the room is from there too, and that's how we build our fellowship together. So this section on my far right, your far left, are there any first or second time visitors that are willing to stand? If you would, please, ma'am. Yes.
I'm Shelby and Carrie. I moved down here about a year ago from Michigan. Lived in New England, originally from West Virginia, so kind of from all over.
Yeah.
Welcome.
And in the center section, first or second time visitors willing to stand. And on my far left, your far right, first or second time visitors. I do want to acknowledge someone that's fairly close to me. My sister Ann is down here. And one of the only ways I can embarrass her is by doing this right now at this moment when she is no longer in control. I do need to tell you an interesting moment that happened between she and I as she was coming in the sanctuary. I had come up behind her, and as I did, she had a red pen in her hand, and she turned around, and so I have a mark right here where once again my sister stabbed me. And so it continues to go on and on and on and on. And now Wendy, it's your turn.
Well, we are so abundant today, obviously with a lot of joy. And we'd like to thank you for always contributing to Sandalwood Food Pantry and Bluffton Self-Health. If you've brought something today to share, please drop it on your way out. We'll make sure that it gets delivered. The community is very much in need. There's a lot of food insecurity right now, so it's greatly appreciated. And we now like to take care of ourselves because we need to stay abundant in our own right. So in order to share our good fortune, those of you that are visiting, please let the basket pass as your gift. Your presence is a gift to us today. And now can we please take our offering to sustain our mission here at UUCL. Thank you for your generosity this morning.
And now's the time that we share our joys and concerns. We share our joys in the way that we can celebrate with one another, and we share our concerns in the hopes that we can help relieve some of those burdens. So if you have a joy and or concern, please come forward, take a stone from the basket, share with us your name and a brief account of your joy and or concern, and then place your stone in the cairn.
My name is Marcella. Many of you always ask, when will I be performing again? Well, if the weather isn't 125 degrees in the shade, or if it doesn't rain, on Wednesday I will be performing at the Lake House in Sun City with my partner. I think it's from 5 to 7 o'clock, so if you can make it. If it doesn't rain, we've had like 2 other occurrences and it has rained both times, so we're hoping that we finally get to perform. Thank you.
It is such a joy to walk in to this sanctuary and hear John playing Bach. I don't know, he seemed particularly inspired this morning. It was just beautiful, John. Thank you.
My name's Diane, and I just wanted to thank everybody for your prayers and good wishes, because this is the week I get to move back into my house after a very long time, so thank you.
I am Steve. About a month ago, I went to visit my oncologist, and he goes, "Steve, I got some good news for you. You are cancer-free." I can't tell you how great it is. I want to thank my wife, Joanne, for putting up and give me the drive. So thank you all for your help.
This is for my twin sons, Chris and Ben, who turned 35 last week.
I find that I'm Dave. I find that as a member of this congregation, I have more need of Yiddish than I've ever needed in my life. And I just want to express my gratitude that you are all such mensches. We have received so many cards and so much support since Guy's passing that our gratitude is just overflowing. Thank you.
So, hi. I'm Jackie, and I'm going to try to get through this very quickly without crying. I've done that before, and it's very embarrassing.
It's okay.
I've been out since December, my nephew, 40 years old, had a hemorrhagic stroke, and he was in horrible shape. We thought we were going to lose him. He was on a ventilator for 3 weeks, and then critical care for a month. He was on a feeding tube. Good news is, after months and months of intensive rehab, he is walking. He was paralyzed on his whole right side. He's walking, you can barely see even a limp. He's talking normally. He's at work. He's driving. Wow. It really is like a miracle, and I can't tell you how joyful my whole family is. In December, we didn't think this was possible at all. And so he'll send me little videos of how he's able to eat with his right hand now, and everyone's all excited over these things, and it's just amazing the progress he's made. So we are just so joyful about that. Some of you know that my dad has been struggling with congestive heart failure for years. He finally passed away in June. Difficult time. Of course, we're glad he's not suffering anymore, but so those are my joys and concerns, and thank you so much. I didn't get through it without crying, but I'm not bawling my eyes out either, so we're okay.
Yeah, I don't feel like getting up here today. Hi, I'm Diana. I had a very mild stroke, very mild, and I think it was very interesting that, who went right before me? Yes, Jackie. Hi, Jackie. I just wanted to say it was very interesting how I came behind you. And it really drives home the message that I got from Ellen today about a lot of us at our age, you know, when we look inside our brains, look like we may have had a stroke. So I did have a mild one. I'm fine. You can tell I'm okay. And I mean, it's all relative, of course, you know. But I'm just glad to be here. I wasn't sure I was going to be here today, but a lot of back and forth, and I'm here, and I'm very grateful to be, and I love each and every one of you. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Libby, and I am here to say thank you to Charlie.
You're welcome. Now, we've got to hear more of that.
You used the word sanctuary. My home is my sanctuary, a sacred place where I feel safe. And maybe some of you feel the same way about your homes. When I leave my home and I return, I say, home, sweet home, I'm home. Mark Twain felt the same way about his home in Hartford, Connecticut. He wrote, "Our house was not unsentient matter. It had a heart and a soul, and eyes to see with, and approvals, and solitudes, and deep sympathies. It was us. And we were in its confidence and lived in its grace and in the peace of its benedictions. We never came home from its absence, that its face did not light up and speak out an eloquent welcome, and we would not enter it unmoved." This quote reminds me of my home, and it reminds me of this space. This space is often used as a meeting place. On Sundays, it becomes a sanctuary, a sacred place. Charlie has used the word sanctuary from time to time. Their program has the words centering music. Music to get us to put all of our attention on the service. Charlie's words help us do this. He says, "Now is the time to calm our minds and hearts." Charlie's words transform this meeting place into a sanctuary. And as John begins to play, I close my eyes and I think, home, sweet home, I'm home. Charlie, namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.
Well, I'm John, and speaking of home, that's kind of ironic at this point, but I spent 5 days a week ago in Port Royal at friends of mine's house while they were away taking care of the dog and the cat. And while Andrea's father had passed away. Anyway, now I'm spending the month at Lynn and Gordon's house in Sea Pines taking care of their plants, which they have many of. So I'm privileged to do that.
I will now place 2 stones in the cairn for the joys and concerns that remain unspoken, and I will also place 2 stones for those families and children that have been affected by gunfire or gun violence. And now if you will join me in reading the affirmation that's in the back of your hymnal, number 682. Beauty is before me, and beauty behind me. Above me and below me hovers the beautiful. I am surrounded by it. I am immersed in it. In my youth, I am aware of it, and in old age, I shall walk quietly the beautiful trail. In beauty it is begun, in beauty it is ended.
So now it's my deep pleasure to invite my first cousin. As Ray is here, you should know that in my mind and in my sister's mind, we are now at the Thanksgiving tables and the Christmas tables and the holiday times. We gather together as Tylers, mostly around Ray's parents, but we did find our hope in this, and we are reminded of it always. And because of that, it gives me great joy to welcome Ray Tyler to this pulpit. Ray, if you would please.
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be back here. As Charlie mentioned, when the service started, he felt privileged to be the pastoral minister. I certainly feel privileged to be invited this 3rd time. I don't know if that's like baseball, 3 times. You get 3 strikes, and this could be my 3rd strike, or whether you like the first 2 times. I'll admit to being nervous this morning for several reasons. One is, I want to do a good job and impress my wife listening and watching online back in Fort Mill. And I want to do a good job for my cousins, Charles and Ann. But in the family, it was Charles and Ann. It wasn't Charlie and Ann. So for Charles and Ann. And then for the faces I see and the names I remember that I've met before, I want to do a good job for you. This feels like a second UU home to me. My wife and I have been members of Piedmont Unitarian Universalist Church, kind of off and on, but mostly either members and or friends for 35 years now. We know when we started, because the twin sons that I mentioned earlier were still in the womb when we started attending that church, so we can date it very easily. And as my wife said, we had 2 little babies that were about to enter the world, and we needed some help, and we wanted help in a moral and a religious and a sense to how to raise them. I'm very proud to say they're 2 very fine young men right now. I love them as sons, but also I just admire them as the men that they've become, and the fathers they've become. And another reason I'm nervous is this topic: are we a Christian nation? To say the C word in a UU church, or the G word for God, or the J word for Jesus, can be a little bit problematic. But this is a topic, a question that has fascinated for me for a long, long time. And I admit to you that as I stand here this morning, I still have more questions than I have answers. And that sounds like your Uncle Charles done it. No, my father, he had very near the end of his life, my dad grabbed my hand one time, and he's kind of in and out of being clear-headed at this point, and he said, son, I don't know a damn thing. And for a long time, I thought that was my father just being my father. He always felt like he had more questions than answers. But I've come to the conclusion, no, it was his final lesson for me. He said, you live your life, son. Don't try to live it the way I would. But he was a Unitarian Universalist that didn't know it, and I'm grateful to say that I know it. So let me restate this question: are we a Christian nation? And if you ask my dad, he tended to answer questions yes and no. It depends. But if you ask a political scientist this question, are we a Christian nation? They're likely to say no. The Constitution prohibits a religious test for office, and the First Amendment prohibits the establishment of religion or any interference in the exercise, the free exercise of religion. You ask a historian, are we a Christian nation? They might say, well, kind of maybe. Depends on how you want to look at this. Certainly, very many people came to the New World for the very first time to seek a religious haven. Not religious freedom in the sense that we think of today. They wanted to create a little community and then lock everybody else out. But even from the very beginning, there was a mixture. There was about half of the Mayflower that we all know as being the Pilgrims and the Puritans. About half of the people in the Mayflower were not Puritans. They were not members of that church, and the Puritans called them strangers. And they were not welcome. You ask someone who teaches human geography. Geography now is not like the geography I had, memorize capitals and names of country on a map and all. My son Ben teaches human geography, AP human geography at Fort Bell High. You ask him, are we a Christian nation? He'd probably say yes. Because the geographer, it looks at the demographics of a country. It looks and sees what is the dominant religion within that culture. And that's the sense that I think is interesting to talk about. Now let me tell you at the beginning, sorry, I am not a Christian. I don't call myself a Christian. I struggle with the virgin birth notion. Doesn't make sense to me. Didn't happen in my house. I struggle with the resurrection. A lot of people, including my wife Linda, sees it as a metaphorical thing, and I can understand that. It's not deep enough within me right now to say I'm a Christian. I call myself, if you make me label myself, I call myself a deist. And the classic deist is that God or some divine creator created the world like a clock, wound us up, and put us on a table and let us run. Okay, I can kind of buy that, but I'm a deist with a twist. And that twist is, I believe that God is still working on that clock. Some kind of divine source is out there working on that clock. And the reason I believe that is because I've experienced it. In a moment of great personal despair, I said, I had let go of this attempt to define and understand and explain God in a way that worked for me. And I said, you know what? I can't figure you out. Just help me. And he did, or she did, or it did. And I choose to call that God. I choose to call it divine. And simply because I grew where I was born, where I was raised, it was a word that comes closest to what that experience is. But I also call myself a born-again Unitarian Universalist. As I began to move down a spiritual path, I found Unitarian Universalism, and I don't know what the right word, I'm baptized, if you want to use that phrase, in Unitarian Universalism. As I mentioned, we started coming when Linda was pregnant with twin sons, and then 20 months later we had a third son, so we really needed help. But we wanted a church that did not dictate to us what to believe. Not a dogma, not a creed. But we wanted help with raising, as she said, to be moral people, and they are. All three of them are very good men. And Unitarianism is the concept, the original concept made sense to me. I never understood the Trinity. I actually heard Bart Ehrman, who's a biblical scholar from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Some of you may have heard of him. He's written a lot on the historical Jesus. Heard him say you can't understand the Trinity because it's not explainable. You know, three gods in one, but one God. It's just, you just can't. It's a matter of faith. You can't explain it from a standpoint of a historian. So that confused me, and Unitarianism made more sense. Universalism made more sense to me because I just don't believe there's a loving God that would condemn children who did not hear the word of Jesus and be baptized to eternal damnation. That never made any sense to me. But I also was concerned. I mean, we arrived in this church 35 years ago. realized recently that next year I will be twice the age of my twins. And they're both bald, by the way. Nothing's made me feel older than my son being bald. But I was baffled by a church that didn't discuss God, or didn't discuss our human relationship to the divine, if you want to use some, or the creator, or the universal force, whatever term you want to use. So that's what I'd grown up with. My parents had dragged us to, and drag might be the right word, to a Southern Baptist church early in my childhood. Now, don't think today's Southern Baptist. It was much more moderate, much more open-minded in those days than it is today. But we went there, and God and Jesus and Christianity and sin and the resurrection, all the cross, that was all familiar to me, as was the G word. At first in our church, every faith seemed welcome but Christianity. And I'm not accusing this church of anything, so don't throw a shoe at me. That's what I would tell my kids. You remember the George W. Bush getting a shoe thrown at him? So don't throw a shoe at me. But I used to joke that if we found, at our church, if we found an indigenous tribe somewhere in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, somewhere out there that begun worshiping yield signs, we'd have been fascinated by that. We would have invited them to come speak to us. But we put a stop sign out for Christianity. Now, I wasn't alone in that church. There were other people that felt that way and wanted to find some way to incorporate what we had grown up with into Unitarian Universalism. A way that demonstrated not just tolerance for those that are Christian, but acceptance. So I thought, well, I'll talk about this, a little bit of arrogance here. So I developed a simple thesis and said, I'll be a guest speaker there one day. So the thesis was that although the United States has never made Christianity an official national religion, America remains a predominantly Christian nation. And that fact has implications for Unitarian Universalists, both as individuals and as congregations. So there are two parts, that we still remain dominated culturally by Christianity, but that means something for us. Now, when I first delivered this talk at Piedmont, I got a little pushback. There were some that, because they knew my interest in history and all, they wanted me to talk about the separation of church and state. Another subject I'm endlessly fascinated by, and I've done a lot of academic work in that area. Others wanted me to focus on the obvious historical track record of Christianity in oppressing other people. African Americans, women, Native peoples, LGBTQ, here and across the world. After a talk, one friend came up to me and just said simply, Ray, the Bible was used to defend slavery. Well, yeah, I know that, that's true. But the Bible was also used to attack slavery. It was used by abolitionists and by defenders of slavery, both. In fact, it was used to justify slavery and condemn slavery. It's also been used to justify and condemn injustice in all its forms. Look back at a letter from the Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King, Jr. It relies heavily on his training as a minister. And in his I Have a Dream speech, he actually had a little bit different speech planned. And he realized he didn't have the crowd. It was another hot day in August in Washington, D.C. They're miserable there in August. And he realized he didn't quite capture them. And Mahalia Jackson, the gospel singer, said, tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream. And he heard this behind his ear. And if you watch the speech online, I encourage you to try this. It's about 18 minutes. You can see the shift. He goes from reading his speech to looking up. And Mahalia whispered to the person beside who said, folks about going to church right now. And he begins to preach. He becomes the Baptist minister that he's trained to be. So it's been used both pro and con. So this chance you gave me is a chance to clarify my thinking a little bit after this pushback from the folks at Piedmont. I appreciate that. So what's the case for we're still cultural Christian nation? The last research I saw, Pew Research, goes back to 2023. Over 60% of the people in America identify as Christian. It had been declining for decades, but recently, in the last 5 to 10 years, they started ticking back up. It's a little over 60%. Would you guess it's higher or lower in South Carolina? It's higher, significantly higher, 78% according to Pew. So we still are a majority Christian, self-identified. Our holidays, our calendar seems to revolve around Christianity to a great degree. Most public schools in South Carolina are going to either take the week before or the week after Easter for spring break. Obviously, Christmas breaks and Thanksgiving are major holidays that have at least some integration with Christianity. And while there is no religious test in the Constitution to hold any public office in the United States, can you imagine at this point in time the country electing a president that does not proclaim to be a Christian? I didn't say he or she was a Christian. I said they proclaim Christianity. Can you imagine that happening? Can you imagine an atheist, an open atheist? I'm not even sure you could slide by, you know. So it's hard. It's integrated into our politics. Obviously, I'm not saying we're legally or constitutionally. We are not. And again, that's an area that is very interesting to me. So what are the implications? If that's true, if you accept this premise, we're still culturally a Christian nation, what does it mean for us as Unitarian Universalists? And again, I confess I have more questions than answers. And I suspect if we went around the room, we'd probably at least come up with maybe dozens of answers, maybe one for every person, which is fine. That's what makes us UUs. I told Charlie last night we were purveyors of questions and merchants of doubt in you. But we're also seekers of spiritual wisdom. So I come to you from that point of view. Well, first of all, I want to be true to my Unitarian Universalist faith. And that says we welcome all the spiritual truth from all religions. So it seems silly to me that we would eliminate the one that's most talked about in our own neighborhood. I want to be able to communicate with my neighbors in a language that they understand. Not accept their dogmas, creeds, but just be able to talk to them in a language that they understand, and hopefully be able to explain myself in a language that they can understand. Along those lines, I recently discovered, and I just got online, looked up the UU World, their bookstore, to see if they had anything that connected what do UUs think about Christianity. I did find this book, 100 Questions That Non-Members Ask About Unitarian Universalism. And some of the questions are, what do you think about Jesus? Are you Christian? And so forth. So hopefully that's like $4, more to ship it than it was the cost of the book. You know? but that might help us. Also, given my historical interest in being a history teacher, and I want to learn about the Unitarian Universalism that was practiced when it was more a prominent place in our churches. Any of you from Massachusetts, Lexington, Concord? I went there last April, for the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, the famous shot heard around the world, Paul Revere's Ride. Crowds were overwhelming. But I also attended the UU Church, the first parish in Lexington. And it has a steeple on top, white church. It goes back to days when Unitarianism did not reject Christianity, but claimed to be another sect, another denomination. And there are several people out there that I'm looking into right now. Theodore Parker, William Ellery Channing, Hosea Ballou, Joseph Priestley, and then I'm also looking at a man named William Henry Furness. The reason I'm interested in him is Laura Town and her friend Ellen Murray were members of that Unitarian church in Philadelphia, and they signed up when the Port Royal experiment started here in your neck of the woods to come to Port Royal and teach the freed people, the formerly enslaved people, in 1862, and they stayed until after they died in the early 1900s. They stayed for 50 years. That's some commitment. So, but they were inspired by a Unitarian minister in Philadelphia. So I want to learn more about current UU ministers, what they're thinking, how do they deal with this issue. And I found a book, I'm a believer in Kindle now. I know a lot of people like the old-fashioned print, but I love Kindle. But the title is Christian Voices in Unitarian Universalism, Contemporary Essays. It's about 15 essays. Some are ministers, some are just lay people that are talking about Christian voices, that are explaining how they merge their feelings of Christianity with their Unitarian Universalism. One of my friends at Piedmont, Neil Mara, who's just a great guy, he had heard of this, or had stumbled across this article by a man named Eric Wickstrom. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He's now UU pastor at the Thomas Jefferson Memorial UU Church in Charlottesville, Virginia. And many years ago, he published a story in the UU World called Jesus and the Modern Seeker, Seeing Jesus with Modern Eyes. And he describes his journey. He can do a better job of kind of talking about this than I can. So I suggest you look this up. But he makes a case for including Christianity, merging it into Unitarian Universalism. He describes his journey. He talks about the Jesus he learned as a child in Sunday school and vacation Bible school. He talks about the Jesus he was exposed to with Jesus Christ Superstar and Godspell and that movement at that time, and saw him as a cooler, hipper Jesus. But he reached a conclusion that he had to make a decision. He had to decide whether or not Jesus was an entity deserving of worship or just a man. Maybe a good man, maybe a good prophet, maybe a good rabbi. He was a first century rabbi. But he's just a man, and I need to look elsewhere for my faith. So he stopped calling himself a Christian and began to practice Zen Buddhism. He tells a story. I don't know if this actually happened to him or somebody heard from, but a man was talking to a Zen Buddhist and asking all kinds of questions about that path. And the Buddhist turned to him and said, "Why are you asking me about Zen Buddhism? You're an American. You have your faith that's here in America. Why don't you start there and learn that in all its entities?" And that fits with my vision of Unitarian Universalism. We are seekers, are we not? And we seek spiritual wisdom. We focus on the message, not the messenger. So how can we justify rejecting the message or messenger that has brought strength and comfort to people for over 2,000 years? Now, the kinds of things I've heard at funerals, when Christians come and try to comfort non-Christians on how to cope with their grief, are not comforting. Excuse me. When my sister Helen passed away, she was the youngest of us, and she was the first to pass away. She was 51 when she died from cancer, and I remember very clearly cousins on the other side of the family, not the Tyler side, saying to my mother, if you just accept that God wanted to call Helen home, and you'll feel better. He wants her beside him. My mother turned and said, "Helen's place is right beside me." It was not comforting. My mother rarely got angry in that way. She would get angry, but she'd wait for you to leave before. So wisdom suggests we take another look, and that's why I use this Corinthians 13:11 as the opening words. It's, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, understood as a child, thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. One of the childish things I think we need to at least reconsider, if not put away, is a childish view of religion. I suspect you wouldn't be here today if you still had a view of Jesus and God is like a Santa Claus. I pray for any bicycle at Christmas, I might get one if I'm good enough. We probably rejected that, but are we holding on to some childish notions and understanding of Christianity and Jesus that we need to let go of? I don't know. I mean, that's one of the things I have questions about. In my view, religion gives us not easy answers, but hard answers to tough questions. So in the case of my mother losing her daughter, how to cope with grief, how to cope with the reality of death, how to move forward. Still picture my mother and father bent over in the graveyard, forehead to forehead, sobbing. How do you move forward? Religion is supposed to help us there with that suffering, that ultimate suffering. Charlie and I recently attended the funeral of a second cousin, Brian Dancy. Brian died at 54 from colorectal cancer recently, and his mother, if I got the story right, his mother Judith asked Brian when it was really clear that he was not going to live through this. She said, "What lessons have you learned?" And Brian said, "Well, Mom, I just think we just need to be kinder than we have to be. Be kinder than we have to be." That's a pretty good description of what religion asks us to do as human beings, I think. But our roots are Christian. Our history is Christian. Theodore Parker, who I mentioned a little while ago, wrote what's become a well-known sermon called The Transient and the Permanent. Transient and the Permanent. In the wonderful world of the internet, you can find that online with a few clicks. Highly recommend something called Internet Archive. And he said the permanent are the words of Jesus. The transient are the sects, the doctrines, the dogma, the creed of the churches that try to implement that. And he has some negative things to say about the Pope. There's a little anti-Catholic bias in there. These things are transient. He goes, including Unitarianism. He wasn't going to take off his religion or his faith off the table from the possibility that we could be transient. We might not have it right. That makes you sort of stop and think, at least it does me. And I think there are a lot of doubters that are open to UU. I'd say we're merchants of doubts. I once rode with, once took a graduate class at Georgetown one summer, and one day we rode down to Montpelier, James Madison's home, and Monticello, Jefferson's home. I got to sit beside one of the scholars on the bus for that long bus ride that day. And at some point I asked him, I said, Dr. Morrison, let's imagine you could go back in time travel, and I can put you any place you want to be in history. You can't change anything. You can just observe and see what happened. Where would you want to go? And he thought for a moment, and he said, does it have to be American history? I said, no, you can go anywhere you want to go. He said, well, I suppose I would go to Jerusalem 3 days after the crucifixion of Jesus, because that sure would answer a lot of my questions. I will never ask that question of anybody else. Because he's hands down the winner on that. And he teaches at a Christian university. He did not say he was a Christian that day, but he teaches at a Christian university to have the impression that he is. So let me leave you with a thought here. 2 visions of Christianity. And they come from the so-called Great Awakening of the 1730s and 1740s. The first Great Awakening. The second Great Awakening in the 1800s. And I'm going to mention 2 sermons. One of them you may be familiar with. It used to be assigned in a lot of high school English classes. Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Do you remember that? Yes. Okay, probably the best known image from that sermon is when the great pastor who wrote it talks about God being like holding a spider. We are like spiders that God is holding over an open fire. At any moment, he can judge us, find us wanting, and release us into a fire. Sermon's pure, hell, brimstone, hellfire, and damnation. Another sermon, same time period, the divine and supernatural right. And this sermon said you can intellectually understand that honey is a sweet substance. But unless you've tasted honey, you cannot know the essence of honey. Boy, that's true for me. I mean, how would you describe the taste of honey to somebody who's never tasted it? But what a contrast. One focusing on a fearful God, one focusing on God that wants us to taste the sweetness of faith. You might be interested to know that those sermons were written by the same man, Jonathan Edwards. You may also want the little trivia here. This is off the topic, but Jonathan Edwards is the grandfather of Aaron Burr, notorious womanizing scoundrel, and Jonathan Edwards were related. Edwards delivered the sinners in the hands of an angry God twice. Once his own church, and once at the request of a fellow minister. When he delivered it the second time, here's what the minister watching described. Before the sermon was done, there was a great moaning and crying out through the whole house. What shall I do to be saved? Oh, I'm going to hell. Oh, what shall I do for Christ? And so forth. So that the minister was obliged to desist. Edwards stopped the sermon. The shrieks and cries were piercing and amazing. After some time of waiting, the congregation was still, so the prayer was made by Mr. Wheelock, and we descended from the pulpit and we discoursed with the people, some in one place, some in another. He scared people so badly, they were crying and screaming and moaning, and he stopped. And he never delivered the sermon again. But what we get in school, for some reason, is sinners in the hands of the angry God. I suggest to you that we as Unitarian Universalists, we seekers of spiritual wisdom, should seek the essence of honey from every religion we touch. Thank you. May God bless you.
Thank you, Ray. And before you come back up, I'm going to ask that we turn in our hymnals to hymn number 318, 318. May we turn to that and stand together, if you're willing and able, and sing We Would Be More. Jill. for being with us today. I hope that you can make your way back among us. And all those who are also visiting with us today, I hope that, pray that you will have found a special community here. One of the ways that we express ourselves in our community is through the talk back. If you're unfamiliar with it, in about 15 minutes or so, we'll gather back in here. Ray and I will sit together. You may pepper him with all the questions you want to ask. He's got answers. Most of them are I don't know. And that's okay, because we are Unitarians, or purveyors of questions. So we gathered back there. I wanted to let you know that you're more than welcome to be back for that. And that's how we really get a chance to share our lives with each other. And for those of you that are wondering about what's going on in here, that's a way that you might be able to see it. So Ray, if you would please, I'm going to ask you for your final remarks.
I had a college professor that said his trick for if you had somebody, a student would ask him a question he didn't know, he'd always shout, Deuteronomy 16. And he didn't get feedback. He got no one willing to challenge him on that. So they usually close it. I'm going to quote from a book by, it's actually not a quote, kind of a summary of his view, a book by Marcus Borg, who is one of the so-called Jesus seminar scholars. His book is entitled Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. So Christianity doesn't have to be a religion about Jesus, but is in fact the religion of what Jesus was always pointing toward, the divine. That can be a huge shift in perspective. Thank you.
As our time together comes to a close, would you please join me in the extinguishing of the chalice? While we extinguish this flame, we still carry in our hearts the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment until we are together again. Amen. Yes.